Today I'll be talking about phototherapy. A feminist tool? Maybe. Throughout the past few months, I have been looking closely at photography as a tool in therapeutic practice and how this practice has evolved, particularly since the 1970s feminist avant-garde. The technique itself is and was used by many well-known female photographers throughout history, arguably because the characteristics and aims of photography align with those of feminist art making, such as incorporating different mediums like fabric and video, using talking and written therapy inclusively, and demonstrating a passion for all emotions to be heard, where only recently women have been allowed to exhibit and popularise their works. Leading on from this, I intend to comparatively and extensively discuss two specific photographers in line with my theme, making relevant comment on the time period in which both projects were completed. Jo Spence, a pioneer of photography as therapy from the late 1960s to 1992, and Jennifer Carody, a new and modernly informed photographer practicing in the eye of the media since the early 1990s. From the 1920s onwards, women began to question and deliberate their role within society. The introduction of political campaigns such as the suffragists and suffragettes during the war began to free the opinions of women and their role in society, therefore evolving the ideology of equality, with the term feminism being used more than ever before. Women began channeling their want for change into the arts. In the 1960s and 70s, the second wave of feminism became apparent through art mediums. Slide 2. Feminist art began for many artistic and political reasons, opening up the dialogues between the art and the observer, whilst including the women's perspective aimed to open up the dilemma on equality and not necessarily cause change, but at least start a conversation about gender equivalence. The framework surrounding therapy, pre-feminist movement, was that of the sexist and stereotypical nature. Through my research, I have discovered that several practicing psychotherapists during the 1970s and 80s demonstrated that they had given different diagnoses based on the sex and gender of their patients. Patriarchal thinking set the foundations of artistic therapies in the beginning, since psychotherapy was a male-led profession. However, during the 1970s feminist movement, these new artistic therapy concepts began to challenge the original ideologies in not only counselling women, but men too. Women hold a different set of moral values. An ethic built on caring, which many feel is superior to the concepts of rights and privileges. There is an infinite variety of such differences in the perspective in feminist works. Marlene Talbot Green, a doctor of counselling, psychology and women's studies, talks about the feminist morals employed in art therapies. The main ethic discussed is caring. This, in therapy terms, not only means caring for others, but teaching the art of caring for oneself. This strongly directs the patients on a path of self-discovery and self-empowerment. Slide 4. I believe that the effects of feminist concepts and consequences on psychotherapy and art therapy will have had a far larger effect on therapeutic activities and thinking once the limitations of patriarchal casualty and constraints endangered by such linear thinking begin to be laid aside. Judy Weiser wrote this in 1990 in a discussion on women in the creative arts. Although her point is clear throughout that patriarchal thinking wasn't a way forward, Weiser also made it clear that her argument was not against men. It is paramount to this discussion to describe the equilibrium that is trying to be created by today's creative therapies. Slide 5. Jo Spence was at first a portrait photographer for small children, but later became a huge part of the feminist arts movements in the 1970s. Spence began to use the photography as a way of exploring current feelings towards her past. Her most invasive and recognised work was the documentation of her journey with breast cancer. Spence used the camera to discuss the body in a way that hadn't been seen before. She set out to take photos in an effort to reclaim her body as her own. Slide 6. Spence collaborated with Rosie Martin, whom she met on a therapy course. They embarked on a relationship involving therapy techniques and creating photos in a studio environment for many years. Slide 7. Jennifer Caridy's most famous work, Soldier Stories from Iraq and Afghanistan, involved building a relationship between photographer and victim in order to release the difficulties the veterans now face in day-to-day life through imagery. Caridy worked with both female and male veterans, and this is so important. Photography and therapy have evolved. During the 1970s, women were becoming so vocal with their self-expression and emotions, something that men feared in case they looked powerless and weak. This has changed and has strengthened the idea and concept around feminist therapy techniques. Slide 8. Especially over the past 20 years, we have evolved into a more accepting society where men can cry and be mentally ill, and this is not a sign of weakness. Don't get me wrong, there is still a massive stigma attached to men that express emotion. Art like Caridy's has sought to resolve this and express it as strength in their personal fight with their weakest moments, having been through the trauma of war. Slide 9. Like Spence, Jennifer Caridy collaborates. However, Caridy's collaboration, although initially just talking with the soldiers who had come home from service, also involved a secondary team. An on-site psychologist and a cinematic technical team were also needed to carry out the visuals brought to light in the interviews conducted by Caridy. What is key here are Caridy's morals and how they are especially similar to the work of Spence, conducted over 30 years previously. Like Spence, Caridy's goal was to create a safe space in order to discuss trauma. Caridy's equipment is more advanced than Spence's ever was or could have been, but reenactment and acting play key roles in the functionality of their techniques, meaning that they are not only drawing on talking therapies and art making, but also drama therapy, movement and composition. Slide 10. I'd like to finish by summing up my thoughts on the initial question I have proposed. Yes, phototherapy is a feminist tool. After all, it was founded by one, maybe unintentionally, but Joe Spence was the first to publish and openly talk about the technique in the psychology and artist worlds. Furthermore, when considering whether it is still effective in today's therapy techniques, I must again draw your attention to Jennifer Caridy. Although Spence and Caridy have different ways of working, their morals, ways of working and aims are the same: to reclaim a sense of positive mental well-being for the participant and clarity about their trauma using visual aids. I am very intrigued to find out what drives Caridy. Is it that of helping others to fulfill her own self-worth, or is it something entirely unrelated and very artistic? I'm awaiting a response on those questions. The feminist way of approaching phototherapy hasn't changed, with caring about someone or learning to care for oneself still at the forefront of it. Treating men and women with equal measure, allowing both to cry and get angry and be given a diagnosis or help based on their personality rather than their sex. Thank you.